Hello, I'm Alter from Alters Aside, and today I'm going to talk about switching during tarot readings. The first thing I'm going to do is explain what switching is, and I'm going to explain this with Legos. This has been a really fun thing for me to figure out how to explain to all of you, and this is something that I think can help people who want to know more about DID or OSDD. And I think it will help people who are systems be able to explain to others what it's like. As always, DID is something that's very personal, and the things that go on in my mind are not always the same as the thing that goes on in your friend's mind who has dissociative identity disorder. However, there are some commonalities, and I have talked to quite a few different systems and found that we are along the same page. All right, here we go. This white part here, that's the mind. Okay, this is one human's mind. Now we have the personality. So this is just going to all be based off of my system. So we have Lyria, Lexi, Jax, and Emma. And look at Emma, has like this really cute little ponytail. Okay, now these are the four alters. Lyria is the host, so most of the time she is what's called in the front. Now sometimes you'll have another alter who is also in the front with her. And that a lot of times is described as a car, which we're going to go back to later, and that's co-consciousness. And then sometimes you have an alter that is deep into headspace, or like really deep into headspace. Now this alter, who's really deep into headspace, is nowhere close to the front. So she is over here doing her own thing, and she is not paying attention to anything that's going on out in the outer world. And this is the inner world. Headspace, inner world, those terms can be interchangeable. Now, when someone is co-conscious, here we have this car, and you can see that there's a steering wheel, and this is sort of how it would be set up for someone who does not have dissociative identity disorder or OSDD, a form of dissociative identity disorder. Not a form of it, it's something that's similar. I'm not going to go into that in this video because it's too much information. So you have one person who drives your car, right? But when you have alters, it looks more like the car has to be built a little bit differently. And maybe you have your host over here driving the car. And then you have an alter sitting in the passenger seat who is giving opinions. Why is this being difficult? Who's giving opinions about how you're driving, what you're doing, what you're saying. And it's not always like negative opinions. Sometimes he's making a little joke and it's very fun, or he's helping you to get through an experience or giving advice about what's going on in the situation, right? And then you still have back here your alter who might be all the way deep in headspace, and then this alter who's in headspace and not close to the front. And then sometimes you have where like everybody is in the car at the same time, and it feels very overwhelming because everyone is talking to the host while the host is trying to communicate with the outside world. All of these alters are talking, and then sometimes like the stuff from the inner world is coming up, and it's very confusing. And it's hard to pay attention to what's going on in the outer world. And that can be a form of dissociating that is not talked about as often. It's, people talk a lot about like, oh, I just sat and stared at a wall, which is a totally valid thing people do, but it's not my experience as much as this. This is way more common for me. Okay, so this is another thing people talk about where one alter is driving the body and one alter is driving the mouth. And so this is a form of co-conscious that is a little more invasive than the one we talked about before, where it's just two people are in the car and one of the alters is giving their opinions. This one is like, I, as Lyria, was doing something and Lexi found it to be unsafe, and so she took over just the mouth, which usually leaves Lyria in this place of like sort of floating head, and aware of what's going on, but not really able to, it's not fully co-conscious, it's just sort of a floating head. That's the only way I can describe it. So then Lexi takes over and handles the situation and then might switch back. Another thing that happens is this feeling where sometimes people will say, who am I talking to? Which altar is this? And it's everybody's kind of smashed together and this is actually way less functional than what I showed you before, where all four of the altars are standing next to each other. This is like, I am in a very confused place and I can't really articulate anything. Too many influences and nobody's really in the front. Everybody's just kind of turned into this weird, messy blob. It's not an enjoyable experience at all. And this is not something that I experience often anymore, but I used to experience this regularly. All of these things are things that I have experienced, over the course of my lifetime, because I've been dealing with this for a very long time, but I didn't always know how to articulate them, and I certainly didn't know how to handle them. So anyway, this is way less confusing, or this is way more confusing than if all the four altars are in the car together. This is the most confusing state. Unless, I guess, one more really confusing state is this, where it just feels like no one's driving. And this is like, I stared at the wall for 45 minutes because no one was driving. Then there are switches where someone will come up to the front and be like, hey, I really love this song, or I want to be the one at this concert, whatever. Can we switch, right? And then Lexi will take over and Lyria will go, in general, Lyria will go co-conscious. Now, there are situations where, Lyria will go back here, but for this example, Lyria is co-conscious. There are also situations, and these are the kinds that you see in the movies all the time and that are portrayed in shows and media, and these absolutely do happen, but for me, they are more rare. I talked about this in another video. I don't have these hard forced switches as often because I've done a ton of healing and a ton of therapy work, but it can still happen, and it absolutely does still happen, which is where you have one personality in the front, one altar, and they just boom, get out. This person takes over and usually starts yelling, because that doesn't tend to happen. At least for me, that happens when there's an argument or something unsafe is going on and this person is deemed not capable of handling it or whatever. She just doesn't want to make Lyria handle it, something like that. So that's the harder switch. And this is where it's more likely for there to be a huge amnesia wall. The amnesia can happen at any point during any of the things that I talked about, but especially when someone is really far in the back, like Emma on her horse. She has chosen amnesia because she doesn't really care about what's going on in the outer world all the time. So she's just over here kind of chilling, doing her own thing, not really paying attention to politics and religion and eating food and all the things that you have to do to be in the outer world. Anyway, so the amnesia wall can happen at any time, but it's way more likely in this situation because something's happened that's pulled her to the front, yanked her to the front and forced her to react in general a negative way. Now before I did a lot of healing work and stuff, there was a lot more amnesia, and I was in an extreme amount of denial about that, which I'll go into another time. But it would be little things would happen, like, where's my ice cream? I thought I had more of it or whatever. And what show did I just watch? And things like that, that I still do have some of that, but it is less. Now let's say you're in a situation where you have your host in the front and she's feeling kind of like mischievous, right? And then you have an alter who's feeling silly and one who's feeling frustrated, annoyed, everybody's lame, and then one who's scared of whatever's happening. These influences, just like with the car analogy, these can all influence what's going on here. So she might start having emotions about something and not understand where they're coming from or why they're happening. And sometimes the emotions can feel far away, and sometimes they feel like right up in your space, and you have to kind of be like, for example, let's say the scared one with Emma, that's probably going to be around food, right? So like Lyria has to be like, okay, I'm going to communicate with Emma and tell her like, it's okay, this is safe for us to eat. Or in a less functional situation, which is sometimes a more honest one, Lyria might just be like, oh, I'm so sick of you being this way about food, and like try to push her back to the inner world so that she can just like not, the feeling is further away, and then Lyria can be up here enjoying her food. Now, that doesn't always work, especially with these two, because they have a little more sway in who's allowed to be pushed back than Lyria does. But Emma's also very respectful, and like if Lyria is like, please just leave me alone, Emma's gonna back off. These two won't. They'll just like continue to be in her face. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, let's say you're getting a reading from me. You're probably dealing with Lyria or Lexi at minimum in the beginning. Most likely we're co-conscious because that's how we roll. I don't know why I did that. I'm a nerd. Anyway, so you're probably dealing with me or Lexi or us co-conscious. And this card comes up. Now, Lexi and I have a little bit of a different opinion about what this card means. And I'm more likely to explain to you what the card means based on what I think and based on what she thinks, because we're co-conscious. And that is the same if Emma shows up and starts giving opinions about what this card means. I will tell you what they are because I'm still in the front. This is not very common. She only shows up here. She's not ever going to like try to get in front of everybody like that, except if there's very certain circumstances that I'm not going to go into. But most of the time she's going to come up to not really give opinions about the cards because she doesn't really know the cards as well as I do. She's going to give a story example. If there's something going on, Emma really likes examples. So if I'm telling you what a card means and it feels like a story would help you understand the implications of what I'm saying, Emma is probably going to be a part of suggesting what story or giving details on what about the story is relevant to the card. Another thing that can happen is there can be like a full switch, especially if you ask me something that is triggering, which tarot is a very sensitive to. Sometimes people come in and they just have, is this guy, whatever, does he really like me, blah, 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 question. But sometimes people have questions that are very intense and they go over trauma, or the cards come up and the cards show me that there has been trauma and I bring it up in a gentle way. And if you want to talk about it, then we talk about it. Now, when those things happen, sometimes Lyria can stay in the front, right? But a lot of times it looks more like this, where now everybody's co-conscious. Sometimes Emma, sometimes she'll come back here because she doesn't want to deal with all this. She's a trauma holder, so she already has like enough to deal with. So this is more likely what you're dealing with, where a different alter will come to the front and deal with the main part of the question, and it gives a little distance here. So even if Lyria she's not having an amnesia wall, but she doesn't have to be upfront dealing with the direct hit of emotion or the question from you or coming up with the answer. All of those things are off of her shoulders and put onto Jax's shoulders. And it's his responsibility now to handle the reading. Now, Jax sometimes will have an accent. It's something that we're working on trying to break because it's very distracting to friends and family. But sometimes that will happen and sometimes people will notice it. I don't feel like people bring it up a lot. A lot of times people just let it go. It has been brought up. I'm not going to go into that right now. It has been brought up, but it's never been brought up during a reading. And that might just be, I don't know, maybe the people who noticed it just thought that it was the spirit world. So anyway, I hope that this has all made sense. If you do want a reading, you can go to my website, Altered Arcana. It's in the bio, and I'd be happy to give you guys a reading.